Got a friend of mine on the phone. Dude, you gotta hear this. Check it out. Played through the whole damn album for him. Bless his heart. Hello, and welcome to the Lancaster Hi-Fi YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about progressive rock. Or, as I thought of it when I was a kid, music that my older brothers listened to and that I was quite fond of. Of course, if you're listening to this channel, then you're probably something of a gearhead like me. So I just wanted to go over the gear that I'm using today, what we'll be listening to as we take our tour through the world of prog. Here's the right-hand turntable, turntable number 1, Pioneer PL 530. The power amp is this modified Magnavox 8608, otherwise known now as the DG SE1. The control amplifier or preamp is this Fisher stereo control amplifier, model number CC3000. Turntable number 2, the realistic Lab 400. We'll be listening through just 2 of the speaker bank that I have over here. We'll be listening to the Hartley Zodiac 1Bs. Lovely speakers, relatively unknown. Now this is not necessarily a tour of my favorite progressive rock albums, and some of the albums that I'll talk about aren't technically maybe included as prog, especially the first, but that's okay because this is my channel and I'll do whatever I want. I want to start with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I don't think there would be prog without this album, and it's one of the first albums that I grew up listening to. I was born the year it was released. The next album that I want to talk about, not really one of my favorite prog albums, not necessarily considered one of the very best albums by this band even. It's Interview by Gentle Giant. And in particular, the last song. And in particular, the last part of that last song, called I Lost My Head. Irresistible. I was 9 years old when that album came out, so I'm not even sure that the song I'm thinking of is that song, but that song is sort of the quintessential Gentle Giant song with lead vocal by Derek Shulman. I remember when I was a kid, my mother and my older brother Bob asking me what my favorite song was. I was 9. I don't think I'd even gotten a radio yet. And my favorite song was a Gentle Giant song. Now, I don't know that for sure fact, because I could only describe it to them and I can only vaguely remember it now. In the house that I grew up in, my dad's speakers were in this large dining room. This was a stereo system to dream of. Macintosh tube amp, Electro Voice speaker cabinets, I think they're the Ambassador. Big corner Mondo speaker cabinets situated in these cedar paneled walls that were at least 10 feet high, maybe 11 or 12. And in these speaker cabinets were not the Electro Voice speakers, but some other UK brand of speakers that I don't know. All I can remember is he called them at some point what I heard as Tasio. They were 18-inch woofers with the tweeter carved out of the magnet. So coaxial speakers. Anyway, I would lie on the floor under the dining room table to listen to music, and that was kind of the optimal place in the room to listen. And I remember this song. So they asked me what my favorite song was, and I could only describe it. Well, you know, it's the one with the sort of lousy singer. Kind of had to be that song. All right, so for me, flash forward a few years, but in the world of album releases, we got to go back a couple of years to Jethro Tull's, I believe this is 1974, War Child. So my first memorable exposure to this was my brother Bob's friend Clark was over one day. I believe this was in the summer, probably the summer before I entered the 8th grade, before I had a stereo, so I would have been listening on my dad's boombox. And Clark said, "Hey, I've got a radio show tomorrow on the college station, you ought to tune in." So I did. And this was one of the songs that he played. It was either this one or the next one. I get them confused in my mind. But
I'll take you down to that bright city mile. There to pound your sweet face and paint on a smile that will show on all the pleasures and none of the pain when you join my explosion and play with my games. Warmer child, dance the days and dance the nights away. Warmer child, dance the days and dance the nights away.
so that was one of the first albums that I bought when I started buying albums. Let's remember, when one collects music or one listens to music on albums that one buys, especially albums that are way past their release date, it's very lucky to run across an album that you're looking for that's relatively obscure, that's not, you know, the 50 millionth used copy of Saturday Night Fever back in the day. So the fact that I was able to run across this album while I still remembered hearing it on the radio that day was quite lucky, really. One of my favorites in 8th grade, and I would draw these emblems on my homework papers in algebra, and I think my algebra teacher was a little bit scared of me. I don't know. I was a weird kid. Let's move along. We go back in time another couple of years to this one. Now, this was the first album that I bought. Not this copy, actually. I replaced the original copy that I bought with this opening version. And it still has a sticker on it, "In Your Ear," so I can't remember where "In Your Ear" was, whether that was in Chicago or Cambridge, Mass. In any case, I bought it around 1990, but I originally bought it in, I guess, 1981, something like that. Around the same time that I bought that Jethro Tull War Child album, but this one was first. Now, when I was first buying albums, I was a lot of the time trying to find the music that I loved, that I had listened to for years, but was gone. My brothers are late generation boomers. I'm an early generation Gen Xer. So they had gone for college by the time I started buying records. In fact, I think they were both graduated from college by the time I started buying records, something like that. Anyway, they were long gone. And so I was trying to reconstruct, to some degree, reconstruct a music library of the music that I loved, simply by remembering album covers and remembering a few group names, like Genesis, like Jethro Tull, like Gentle Giant, and remembering album covers that I had seen and knew that's an album that I like. Now this one, of course, is just special, and of course this song.
Walking across the sitting room, I turn the television off. Sitting beside you, I look into your eyes. As the sound of motor cars fades in the night time, I I swear I saw your face change. It didn't seem quite right. And it's hello babe, with your guardian hair so blue. Hey my baby, don't you know our love is true? Coming closer with our eyes, a distance falls around our bodies. Out in the garden, the moon seems very bright. 6 saintly shrouded men move across the lawn slowly. The 7th walks in front with a cross held high in hand. And it's, hey babe, your supper's waiting for you. Hey my baby, don't you know our love is true?
That album's really a masterpiece. I'm not a big Genesis fan. I didn't become a big Genesis fan, but I love that album, and especially that song. Now, this may be the second album that I bought. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, ladies and gentlemen, Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. Maybe I should just let the man say it.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. Ladies and gentlemen, Emerson, Lake, and Palmer.
Well, I may have found some bass that is too low for this amplifier to handle. It's the bass problem. I have another video about that. I can barely listen to this album anymore. It's just, I mean, I have since bought a couple other Emerson, Lake and Palmer albums, but they're just a bit much. Amazing musicianship, but as a teenager, as a 14, 15-year-old, I really liked this album a lot. Here's another album that you may tell me is not prog. Metal by Pink Floyd. They'll say Pink Floyd's not a prog band. And I'll say, okay.
Strangers passing in the street by chance to separate classes meet. I am you and what I see is me. Do I take you by the hand and lead you through the land? Help me understand the best I can. No one calls us to move on, no one forces down our lives. No one speaks and no one tries, no one flies around the sun.
When I remember these albums, I can't help but think about where I got them. I told you where I got the second copy of Foxtrot. In most of the records that I bought when I was in junior high and high school, including this one, I bought at a store called the Record Exchange, which was owned and operated by Glenn Shit, I blanked on his last name. You know, there's a similar sort of record store, maybe a similar-ish kind of guy, although Glenn is one of a kind, but record store in town that I get my records from. And they don't really do much in terms of classical music. But I can't help but think if my dad were alive, they would most definitely deal in classical music, because I think Glenn probably relied on my father for a substantial portion of his monthly income. So my dad had an immense collection, and mostly classical. Some jazz, but mostly classical. Now, this album, Dark Side of the Moon and Animals, I bought new. Now, the Record Exchange, as the name implies, dealt in used records. So I would buy albums there, and I learned from my dad how to take the records out of the sleeves, inspect them for scratches, learn to recognize scratches that would result in the record skipping versus scratches that were on the surface and would allow the needle to pass. Might degrade the sound quality a bit, but would still be listenable. But the Pink Floyd album, this one, Dark Side of the Moon and Animals, I bought new at a store within walking distance of my house called Sterling's, which was a dime store. Now, all you kids out there, you wouldn't know what I mean when I say dime store, but probably most of the people who watch my videos know what I'm talking about. A dime store, this one was bang next to the grocery store. It carried the things that the grocery store didn't, and that the big department stores might not, but that you didn't want to have to go to the big department store to get. So they had a little record section, and I bought my Pink Floyd albums there. I bought Auto-American by Blondie. That may be about it. They didn't have a great record selection there. Before I leave this album entirely, it's not the only triple live album that I had around the same time. I don't know if it was the first album by Yes that I bought, but I got Yes Songs, which was a triple live album. Those may have been the only triple live albums, but other noteworthy live albums by prog bands were Playing the Fool by Gentle Giant. I was really into that one. That really helped get me into their entire catalog. Seconds Out by Genesis. That was a great one. This one's pretty obscure. They actually had a hit in 1972 called Hocus Pocus, and that album was called Focus 2. This one is Focus 3. Mostly instrumental, because they're not native English speakers. I think they're Swedish, but they could be Norwegian for all I know. I don't know. Anyway, but for those in the know, Focus 3 is a great album, and this is probably the best song on it. Just an amazing song. All right. Moving on. I did mention Yes, didn't I? This appears to be one that I bought new, and I'm trying to remember when. Did I buy this in New York? I may have bought this in New York City. Roundabout's probably the biggest hit on this album, but not really the one that just blew me away. And of course, I had already had Yes Songs by the time I bought this album, so I was familiar with it, but just an amazing song.
distance. How can the wind with its arms all around me?
So I think some people may think that this is their second album. The Yes album's obviously their first. No, this is their fourth album. The first two albums are kind of forgettable. Yes and Time and a Word. Not totally awesome. And then they hit a stride, like an amazing stride, and put out a string of albums in the space of a few years that are just amazing. The Yes album, this one, Fragile, Close to the Edge, and then I think Relayer, or I can't remember whether Relayer or Tales from Topographic Oceans is first. And I'd arguably those two aren't as good as the three previous, of which this is the middle. The classic Yes lineup: John Anderson, Bill Bruford, Steve Howe, Chris Squire, and Rick Wakeman, before Bill Bruford was stolen away by King Crimson. So 1972. Focus 3, I believe, is 1973. The next two are definitely two of my favorite prog rock albums. First, Freehand by Gentle Giant. This was probably their last really solid album. Not to diss the later stuff, but they were on a run in the 70s. I don't know, their first one maybe not so strong, but Acquiring the Taste, Three Friends, Octopus, In a Glass House, Power and the Glory, Freehand. I mean, that's a run of 6 really strong albums. Now, a lot of us got our Gentle Giant albums from cutouts, remainder bins. This I got used, so somebody else got it from a remainder bin. Is that even a thing anymore? I don't know if that's even a thing. Yeah, if you've got an album with a bit cut out of it, maybe a corner cut off or just a hole poked in the sleeve, that's a remainder bin album. It would have been put on discount, essentially clearance, once the album went out of print. And then the 80s reissues of the Gentle Giant albums, and in particular this one, Octopus, which you can tell is a reissue because it's not got the original cutout bit of sleeve here. The original American issue was contoured, not just a regular sleeve like this one. Since I bought this new, I probably did not buy it in my hometown of Fayetteville, Arkansas. I probably bought this in New York City. Starting off, Freehand is one of the strongest cuts on the album, just the same. Octopus, I was a bit familiar with some of the songs on this album from the excerpts from Octopus that were on the live album Playing the Fool. Gentle Giant had to do some rearrangement of their songs in order to play them live. As you can tell, that one pretty busy, but the main rearranging job they had was that their second lead vocalist, Carrie Meniere, just did not have a strong enough voice to sing live. I mean, it just wasn't technically feasible at that point. Maybe it would be now, I don't know. So I was familiar with parts of this album, but not any of the parts that Carrie Meniere sang. And so this album was something of a revelation when I first heard it.
They're coming over Chariton Bridge. Look, do you see the man who is poor but rich? What do you wish and where do you wish and where do you go? Where are you? Where you from? Will you tell me your name? Rest a while, call me if friend, please stay with me, I'd like to help. Then he said, how can I speak when I'm dry? How can I speak when I'm dry? So bring me aid and I'll answer your dear friend. Indeed, I'd like your help. Please take me home, I'll stay with you.
This album, Octopus, it's a friggin' masterpiece. Favorite prog album ever. Will always be my favorite prog album. 8 amazing songs on it. The last song with the oldest brother, Phil Shulman, still in the band. This was released in 1973, which I believe must make Freehand from 1975. They put these albums out fast and furious for a bit there. Hardworking band, managed to make a decent living at it, but not from a UK fan base, although they were, of course, a UK band. But UK fans kind of fickle or unforgiving, if you will. The three Shulman brothers' prior band was Simon Dupree and the Big Sound. Derek Shulman was Simon Dupree. They started off as kind of a blues rock band and then morphed into a psychedelic band, and that morphing was just not acceptable with their UK fan base. And so when they re-emerged as Gentle Giant in 1969, they were not accepted. They were not particularly well accepted in the UK. And so their major fan bases were in the US and West Germany. And in fact, I bought a couple of my Gentle Giant albums in West Germany. That used to be a thing for all you kids out there. West Germany. They had Deutschmarks back then. There was a wall, because I'm not sure if I bought those albums in West Germany or West Berlin, which was not technically part of West Germany. Fun fact. I gotta say a few more words about Gentle Giant. If you are a prog fan, you like Gentle Giant. If you like Gentle Giant, you're a prog fan. And if you're a real prog fan, Gentle Giant might be your favorite prog band. If they're not your favorite prog band, you might not be a prog fan. If you don't like them better than Jethro Tull, for example. I mean, I like Jethro Tull, but they're not my favorite band. I don't think any Jethro Tull album measures up to that run of 6 that Gentle Giant had. I don't know if that's a controversial opinion or not. Jethro Tull certainly had greater popular appeal. Gentle Giant's just the better prog band. Sorry. Not sorry. Alright, well, let's talk about bands that, if you're a prog fan, this might be your favorite prog band. If it's not Gentle Giant, it might be this one. Who could I be talking about other than King Crimson? Really the first great prog band. And they came out with In the Court of the Crimson King. That was 1969. I think Genesis had their first album, Genesis, in 1969. Not a very good album. Yes, I think their first album was in 1969. Yes. Not a very good album. In the Court of the Crimson King, fucking amazing album. But then you really want to get serious. I mean, hardcore, heavy King Crimson, Lark's Tongues in Aspic, starts off, I mean, it gives me chills thinking about this album. Everybody who knows this album remembers the first time they played it. And if you don't know this album, I will clue you in a second. You remember the first time you played this, right? Kept turning it up, didn't you? I'm going to play that song, Lark's Tongues in Aspic Part 1. This is either the sort of second or third incarnation of King Crimson, depending on how you count things. Well, let's just get straight to the music. I'm not going to play it from the very beginning. It would take too long to get to the, you know what I'm talking about. this time you had the volume up pretty loud and you're thinking, ruh-roh. Okay, so you back off on the volume a little bit. Turns out this amp can't handle it. That's the moment when, depending on your situation, you would have either jumped up to turn the volume down rather than like annoy everybody else in the house or the apartment or whatever, or you would have just sat back and had your hair blown back. Amazing album all the way through. Bill Bruford, of course Robert Fripp, John Wetton on bass and vocals, and then Jamie Muir, percussion and all sorts. David Cross, violin, viola, mellotron. Now if you're around my age and you're into King Crimson, then you certainly know this album. This was, again, depending on how you count it, the third or fourth incarnation of King Crimson. 1981, Discipline, Adrian Belew, Bill Bruford again, Tony Levin on bass and stick, of course Robert Fripp, guitar and devices. I'll just play the first track, Elephant Talk. Wouldn't have known what to expect really. I didn't.
It's only talk, comments, cliches, commentary, controversy, chatter, chit-chat, conversation, contradiction, criticism. It's only talk, tick-tock.
Of course, with King Crimson, you had both Adrian Belew and Robert Fripp playing guitar through the guitar synthesizer, which you got a little taste there. The Larks, Tongues, and Aspic lineup had their run of 3, which ended with Red, also an amazing album, one of my favorite prog albums. And then this was the first of a run of 3, Discipline, Beat, and 3 of a Perfect Pair. I haven't really kept up with King Crimson after that. There's other music after 3 of a Perfect Pair, but by then I'd kind of moved on from prog. Hard to be a prog fan onward from the 80s. This wasn't much prog. Now, if you're into prog, we can't leave King Crimson without talking about, well, what the hell was Robert Fripp doing between 1974, when Red came out, and 1981, when Discipline came out? Well, he didn't do music at all for a bit. I believe the first album he played on after Red was Heroes by David Bowie. So that's got some amazing Fripp work on it. He did a bunch of session work. He was on Parallel Lines by Blondie, Fade Away and Radiate, great Fripp song. He produced The Roaches, so I'm sure I'm missing some. But he also did a solo album or two. This is the one I have and the one I know, of course, about. Exposure. Fripp doesn't sing, so this album has a number of guest vocalists on it, including Daryl Hall, especially including a version of this song.
I took the old track, the hollow shoulder across the waters. On the tall cliffs, they were getting older, sons and daughters. The jaded underworld was riding high. Waves of steel hurled metal at the sky. And as the nails sunk in the cloud, the rain was warm and soaked and proud.
So this album is pretty amazing, really, start to finish. See, recorded mainly and mixed entirely at the Hit Factory, New York between January 1978 and January 1979, although there are bits that were recorded in 1977. It's worth reading who appears on this album. Barry Andrews, courtesy of Virgin Records. Phil Collins, courtesy of Charisma Records. Brian Eno, Robert Fripp. Peter Gabriel, courtesy of Charisma Records. Daryl Hall, courtesy of RCA. Peter Hamill, courtesy of Charisma Records. Tony Levin, Jerry Marotta, Sid McGuinness. Terry Roach, courtesy of Warner Brothers. Narada Michael Walden, courtesy of Atlantic Records. Cover art, Chris Stein. Design and photography, Chris Stein of Blondie. And now for something completely different. And I have to tell a bit of a story. So I started swimming on the swim team summer before my 8th grade year. And my first swim coach was this guy named Matt Devlin. Matt and his brother Andy, Matt was the club coach and Andy was the high school coach. And I can't remember exactly when Matt figured out that I was into prog. I would have never guessed that Matt Devlin was into prog rock, because he wasn't. He had recently acquired an acoustic guitar and he was learning to play country and western songs. And he was into country and western music. But as he later said, that was because chicks weren't into prog. He lent me this album. I had no idea what to expect. You can be a prog fan and never have heard of Bebop Deluxe, but you're missing out. And let me give you just a small taste of what you're missing out on. The band's led by a guy named Bill Nelson, who's a guitar player.
This guitar does not lie. The great deception is not my achievement. The spell of all sings the blood and I still do that palm smiles. I play the power of you between the darkness and the dark deceiving light. This guitar does not lie. The great deception is not my achievement.
have a flavor of Bebop Deluxe. I have one other album by Bebop Deluxe. I don't think it's as good as this one, Modern Music. It's fine, but this one's fucking amazing. Oh my god. 1975. Wow. Now here's a band that you may be forgiven for not having heard of. Horslips. They are Irish. This is the first Horslips album that I bought. The Man Who Built America. That's just here. This album came out in 1978, viewed by some as a bit of a sellout, I suppose, trying to get into the American market. And this album did quite well in the American market. I remember the day I got a friend of mine on the phone, and I was playing this album on my dad's stereo system. I was like, dude, you gotta hear this, check it out. I played through the whole damn album for him. Bless his heart. It's recorded in 78, actually released in 79. There's another album after this that's a bit unfortunate, sort of their full-on go new wave album. That was an unfortunate thing that happened to some prog bands that found themselves on the wrong end of the Sex Pistols, basically. The earlier two albums that I have by this band are kind of better prog albums anyway. This is nice. I like this album. It's got some great hooks. It's kind of a pop album, really. But there are other albums, Aliens, and I think before that, Celtic Symphony. What's the name of that album? Book of Invasions. Amazing album by Horslips. Arguably their best album. Aliens is also very good. And of course, I like this one. Good band. I remember some people saying, why would I listen to a band that sounds so much like Jethro Tull? It's like, to me, that didn't really sound... I mean, I like them better than Jethro Tull, really. And didn't sound all that much like Jethro Tull to me. I mean, other than being prog and having a flute player. Had a bit of a rejuvenation or renaissance in Ireland as a Celtic rock band, sort of being recognized as the forerunners of Celtic rock. The name Horslips is a so-called spoonerism of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. All right, I'm going to end with a few that you might disagree with me about whether it's prog. First, Todd Rundgren's Utopia. This album came out in 1974. I think of Utopia as Todd Rundgren's guitar god alter ego. Okay, this isn't prog. You tell me why I shouldn't think of this as prog. you don't think that's prog, I suppose you'll tell me this isn't prog. That in 1981, some of us prog fans might have been a little desperate to call. Might have been a little desperate for some new prog rock. Blue Oyster Cult. Whatever you say. I think it's prog. And heavy metal. And just good old rock and roll. And finally, a band that I know today is not prog, but I had to learn that this was not prog because back when I first heard this music, it sounded like prog to me. Yeah, like I said, I know The Who's not considered prog, but if I was hearing this in the context of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Yes, Pink Floyd, Gentle Giant, I didn't discern a particular difference. Can't remember when exactly this album came out. 1971. There we go. Can't say it wasn't influenced by and or influenced prog. So again, these are not a top 10 or whatever. For example, this is not my favorite Horslips album. I still love this album because it's the first Horslips album that I got. And that's kind of the story of this video. These would have all been albums that I bought between maybe late 1980, but more realistically, probably early 1981. By 1984, I was kind of nearly full on into punk and new wave and hardcore and kind of put prog aside for many years. I'm trying to think, was Three of a Perfect Pair actually the last prog album that I bought? It may have been. Other than replacing Foxtrot by Genesis, probably Horslips was the last prog band that I was sort of into buying albums. Yeah, I mean, I really didn't start listening to much prog again until kind of the last several years. This has been fun. This is digging back into my ancient musical past. Again, a lot of this is music that I grew up listening to from a very young age. You know, not as young as, say, my earliest musical memories are things like Blood, Sweat and Tears and the Allman Brothers Band, Chicago's first album. I don't know, for example, when my brothers discovered King Crimson. In the Court of the Crimson King came out in 1969, but I remember that album cover. It's so distinctive being in the house, but I can't remember the order of things that far back. For me, just the really ancient stuff in my memory, the real primal stuff is Blood, Sweat and Tears and Chicago, to some extent the Allman Brothers as well. And then it was prog and, the other stuff that I've played that maybe is technically not prog, but to me, same kind of stuff, basically. Well, thank you for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed all that. Hey, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. That'd be awesome. And, give it a like. Give me some comments. Like I said, not my top 10, more just my journey into prog, really. And so, feel free to share in the comments any noteworthies that I may have left out. I mean, I know I've left out some noteworthies. Noteworthies in my own collection. Yeah, anyway. Cheers.